For over 100 years, conventional science has theorized that the dinosaurs arose through random evolution, were masters of the Earth for millions of years, and then died off suddenly and mysteriously approximately 65 million years ago. Strict Christian creationists, however, insist that all life, man and dinosaur alike, must have come onto the Earth at the same time. Did the dinosaurs die off in a random cosmic catastrophe of extinction-causing proportions? Or did they eventually become extinct through circumstances of a more divine nature? Have the dinosaurs been fully wiped off the face of the Earth? Or are we even today seeing the last of the Leviathans? The dawn sun cuts through the morning mist and the world is rising to wakefulness. Gigantic plant-eating dinosaurs begin a day of harmless grazing. But the pastoral scene is broken by a vague, unsettling feeling clouding the area. A young Tyrannosaurus is stalking through the forest in search of a meal. The cool morning air is warming, and the winds carry the scent of another T-Rex invading the first one's territory. The result is predictable. But what is particularly unusual here is that humans watch this scene from a hilltop. Scenes of such scenarios are universally mocked by conventional scientific establishment. However, should they be? The prevailing scientific view of dinosaurs is that they arose through the random process of evolution and attained gigantic size, even though the newborn offspring were relatively small. Then one fateful day, the theory goes, a cataclysm of global proportions fell from the sky. A gigantic asteroid 5 or more miles across impacted on the Earth's surface with the power of thousands of atomic bombs. The impact vaporized the immediate area for miles in diameter. Hundreds of miles away, tornado-strength winds and the burning heat wiped out an infinite variety of life into the maelstrom. Eventually, the dust and debris which was hurled up into the sky blocked the light and heat from the sun for years. The plants died, and the food chain was destroyed, taking most of the life on Earth with it. The great saurians vanished, opening the door for the evolution of small mammals to eventually attain absolute domain over the Earth and evolve into human form. That theory, however, ignores that 2/3 of the surface of the Earth is covered by oceans. If such an asteroid were to strike with equal force into an ocean, the initial impact would cause gigantic tidal waves thousands of feet high all over the world. These waves would wipe away everything in their paths. Like the dirt and the ash from the ground impact theory, a huge proportion of the ocean impact would be sent into the atmosphere in a massive display of steam and vapor. The resulting torrential rains would continue for months, initially flooding virtually every part of the globe. This scenario, more probable than the first by more than 3 to 1, would also cause mass destruction and extinction on a global scale. But this latter theory also stays in line with both the Bible and ancient historical record of a great flood which covered the earth, destroying most of the life on earth with it. A meteor impact on land would show gigantically high levels of fossil skeletons in one thin line throughout the Earth's surface. Such a fossil record does not exist. But if the dinosaurs and most other animals perished in the global floods, the decomposition of the animal carcasses would be exceedingly rapid, as in today's oceans. The lack of such a fossil record proves beyond doubt that the swift extinction of the dinosaurs occurred with the help of water, not dirt and ash. To understand the starkly different theories which exist between secular science and Christian Judeo-belief, we must first and foremost understand Darwin's theory of evolution. Even though Darwin's theory is taught in public schools as fact, 45% of educated Americans still reject the theory of evolution outright. Public schools also fail to mention the fact of Darwin's slim scientific credentials. Born on February 12, 1808, Charles Robert Darwin was a British naturalist student who, upon graduation from Oxford, attended a worldwide British science expedition for 5 years between 1831 and 1836. Darwin was just out of school at the time and not in any way an accomplished scientist, nor was he destined to become one by any academic standard. Having gotten the reputation as a young man of being interested only in frivolous occupations, his father sternly objected to the idea of his son running away on yet another idle pursuit. But Darwin wrote for and received an invitation to attend the voyage, and visited such places as the Andes, Australia, the Galapagos Islands, and South Africa. Upon returning to England, Darwin sat down with his notes and specimens and, from those studies the student, now in his early 30s, invented his theory of evolution in a book called Origin of the Species. The well-known theory, taught in the last 80-plus years in most schools as scientific fact, theorizes that men and animals change and evolve over generations according to the external forces around them. The basic foundation of this theory is called natural selection, and it was on that basis that future scientists theorized that men descended from apes. Natural selection works like this. If brown rabbits escape the jaws of predators because they blend in with their forest surroundings, but white rabbits do not, then the brown rabbits live to be parents of more brown rabbits, eventually resulting in forest rabbits being more or less uniformly brown. Needless to say, this theory made Darwin a much-talked-about individual, and as Darwin was gaining acceptance among the intellectual elite of his era, a new school of thought was beginning to appear. Creationism, as taught in the Bible, was now starting to become mocked by Darwin's supporters, a practice that continues today. Thomas Huxley, a man with self-admittedly no formal education, eventually became one of Darwin's fiercest defenders, and conversely one of the loudest and most verbose critics against all things Christian. Huxley's views, though progressively angry and vindictive in tone as the years passed, became popular among agnostic high-placed intellectuals of his time. Consequently, and in less than half a century, Darwin's theory of evolution replaced biblical teachings entirely in most schools which even today never teach any opposing viewpoints to Darwin and Huxley's theories. For Darwin's initial theory of evolution to have worked, there should have been massive fossil evidence showing the slow and consistent evolutionary progression of most species, including man, but no such fossil record exists. Even Darwin himself recognized this primary flaw in his theory, but imagined that the fossil record would eventually bear him out. It has not. What we see instead in the stone diary of the Earth is a fitful progression of starts and stops, when whole species disappear and other species suddenly materialize. Instead of dismissing Darwin's theory as untenable, however, secular science has modified it into evolution by mutation. This means that a new species is created essentially by accident and then somehow replaces the older species. That theory, however, assumes a different kind of fossil record to support it, a fossil record in which there exists millions of fossils of mutations which did not succeed. as would be required by the law of averages. Once again, though, there is no fossil record to support that theory. This exhausts the basic theories of evolution that we are taught as fact. But if evolution is so flawed a concept, how can the vast majority of highly degreed scientific professionals continue to support it? The answer may be more cultural than scientific. The scientific community has demonstrated unfounded biases before, not the least of which concern the dinosaurs themselves. When one of the first dinosaur fossils was found in the late 1800s, it was called Iguanodon, because the teeth very much resembled those of an iguana lizard. Iguanas are cold-blooded creatures, and so it was reasoned at that time that Iguanodon was a cold-blooded creature also. In fact, so much confidence was placed in the assumption of a cold-blooded Iguanodon that when the full Iguanodon skeleton was unearthed, the creature was assembled in the configuration of an actual iguana. The Crystal Palace, a British museum and exhibition center since destroyed by fire, had a few dozen nearly full-size dinosaur statues built for an enormous exhibition. These statues still exist on the grounds of the former Crystal Palace as weird and fantastic reminders of just how wrong secular science can be, even when the evidence is clear. Dr. Robert Owen of the Crystal Palace even went so far as to have a hollow statue of such a creature built in which was held a dinner party to celebrate this supposed remarkable scientific achievement. The problem, however, was to imitate the physiognomy of an iguana. Most of Iguanodon's bones were placed completely out of joint. As absurd a mistake as was possible, and a physiognomical configuration which would have made life impossible for poor Iguanodon. It wasn't too long before the scientific community understood this mistake and the creature was set into its proper physical configuration. But this new configuration posed a different and more vexing problem. Something called metabolism dictates that such cold-blooded dinosaurs could never support their own weight. Logically, then, the large two-legged strides of creatures such as Tyrannosaurus rex should have made it clear as early as the 1920s that the two-legged dinosaurs must have been warm-blooded. Tragically for human understanding, however, this common-sense conclusion was utterly rejected by the scientific community for almost a full century. Instead of simply admitting that the dinosaurs were warm-blooded as logic demanded, the entire scientific community of the world began inventing lifestyle scenarios for the dinosaurs. Scenarios invented to rationalize their scientific bias of cold-blooded dinosaurs. On reflection, these scenarios were unlikely at best and comical in some of their more common forms. Tyrannosaurus, for example, they said, must have saved energy and therefore justified his supposed cold-blooded metabolism by balancing himself on his tail, like a tripod. Besides giving T-Rex a comical walk which should have been immediately apparent, the additional problem with such a scenario is if he ever fell down as a cold-blooded creature, he could almost certainly never have gotten back up again. The degree to which common sense demanded that dinosaurs were warm-blooded should have been obvious as early as the 1920s. Yet the entire learned and highly degreed scientific community held onto a clearly untenable model of cold-blooded dinosaurs despite all logic and common sense against it. This history of how science viewed dinosaurs is a solid example of how the scientific community at large can get a hold of a simple and entirely incorrect theory and doggedly stick with it regardless of all logic and evidence against it. Likewise, even today, the scientific community continues to hold the theory of evolution as supposed fact, a theory which Darwin himself admitted was not supported by the fossil record. But if scientists are wrong about evolution, does this mean that the strict Christian creationists are right about their view of the dinosaurs? Christian creationists hold that dinosaurs lived in the time of men and may continue to do so in remote areas. They also believe that the dinosaurs are the foundation of many biblical and legendary references to fantastic creatures such as dragons. Naturally, these views promote a wide degree of mocking skepticism from anyone raised on the idea of Darwinian evolution. But the facts and evidence the creationists present to support their case, however, are considerably more complex and effective than Darwin's rather simple and unfounded presumption. This passage from the Old Testament gives us a startling description of a creature which, according to science, must have been completely unknown to man as early as 200 years ago.
Behold now the human which I made, and Christ as an ox. Lo now, his strength is in his loins, and his flesh is in the navel of his belly. He moveth his tail like a sea. The sinews of his loins are like together. His bones are as strong as pieces of brass. His bones are like bars of iron. He is the chief of the waves of the law.
Over the centuries, the behemoth was thought to be a hippopotamus, or, more likely, an elephant. Certainly an elephant is huge, eats grass, and has bones which could be thought of as being as strong as iron bars. However, the following sentence does not describe an elephant or any other creature thought of as not being extinct.
He moveth his tail like a sea.
Cedar trees particularly have always been known for their awesome height and diameter. An elephant's tail, however, is a small, thin tail. It hardly matches so grand and awesome a tail as that of the behemoth. The same is true of the rhino and the hippopotamus. Only one creature ever to have existed on Earth has the size, the power, and the enormous, stiff, swaying tail that is described of the behemoth in the book of Job.
He moveth his tail like a sea.
There is only one creature on Earth which fits the description of the behemoth in the Bible: the great sauropod dinosaurs. There are many instances of the Bible describing scientific fact long before those facts were known scientifically by man. These quotes from the Old Testament seem to confirm astounding scientific foreknowledge in the Bible.
It is he who sits above the circle of the earth. He stretches out the moon over the empty spaces and hangs the earth on nothing.
Long before Copernicus described the orbits of the planets or Isaac Newton defined the law of gravity, these passages from the Bible, though written in the simplicity of the time, appear to describe quite accurately a globe held in check by gravitational forces. The circle of the earth hung upon nothing. This, thousands of years before gravity was a known force or that the earth was scientifically recognized to be round. Even more fascinating is that it has only been in the last 20-plus years that scientific knowledge has actually caught up with the biblical description of the behemoth. When dinosaurs were thought to be cold-blooded, the great sauropods were imagined to have their tails dragging behind them as long, limp appendages. We now know that the sauropods had stiff tails, which reached far straight away from the hip. Indeed, in most current reconstructions, some of the tail vertebrae are theorized to have been actually fused together. Such a tail would be stiff and straight and would sway slowly to keep the creature in balance, exactly as described of the behemoth. So now, after 100 years of study, the great sauropod dinosaurs seem to meet their destiny. Finally, and without flaw, they show themselves to be the perfect illustration of the behemoth as described in the biblical book of Job, written 3,500 years before the first dinosaur skeleton was unearthed and reconstructed. However, there is more to behemoth than mere physical characteristics. The passage begins,
Behold now the behemoth which I made with thee.
Here God in scriptural passages quoted specifically as saying that he made the behemoth alongside human beings. But how could this be if the dinosaurs lived and died millions of years before the first man walked the earth, as is assumed by current scientific theory? The answer here too, according to creationism advocates, lies in the half-accurate assumption of another current, conventional scientific school of thought. An often relied on method of dating animals and vegetation is called radiocarbon dating. Put simply, this method tests the amount of carbon, or C14, in the carcass of a dead animal. When an animal dies, the carbon which was absorbed into it in life begins to decay. The amount of time for half of that carbon to decay, or the half-life, is 5,580 years. By the time all the measurable carbon is gone, approximately 50,000 years will have passed. Also, however, as the carbon disintegrates, an element called nitrogen replaces it. This is significant because the amount of nitrogen in living animals is more or less the same of that of the atmosphere of the Earth, meaning after 50 to 100,000 years, the amount of carbon in the atmosphere should be equal to that of the nitrogen. However, measurements from various dating methods indicate that there is still far more carbon than nitrogen in the atmosphere today. This places the chronologic history of the Earth, according to the carbon dating process itself, at less than 100,000 years. This demonstrates, according to creationist scientific theory, that the world must be hundreds of thousands, not millions of years old. The inventor of this process, William Libby, like Darwin before him, acknowledged the fundamental flaw in his dating method, and he too, like Darwin, ignored the critical flaws in his theory. In other words, the radiocarbon dating method is incapable of measuring anything older than 50,000 years. Like the cold-blooded dinosaur theory, the scientists who use Libby's method simply ignore the fact that the system doesn't work for dinosaurs. Instead, hope is once again placed that future discovery will give fact to their theory, instead of basing their theory on fact. Other systems are also used for dating fossils, and each one has at its core an assumption not supported by the facts. The Bible also tells of a man named Noah and his family, and how they saved the human race and all the animal types on earth in an ark. This ark they built to survive a flood which covered the entire world, a flood which God blighted upon mankind after mankind had corrupted itself. There is abundant historical and scientific evidence that a flood engulfed the world in the past, and worldwide legends tell of variations of the Noah story. Tantalizingly, to this day there exists in southern Turkey, partially encased in a glacier at the top of Mount Ararat, what more experts than not believe to be the remains of Noah's Ark. But if the dinosaurs existed at the time of man and perished in the flood, could Noah then have taken some dinosaur types upon the ark? Certainly, given the size of full-grown sauropods, the idea seems unlikely, until one remembers that dinosaur infants and juveniles were many times smaller than the adults. No biblical mention is made of whether the animals on the ark were juvenile or adult. If only young creatures were taken upon the ark, then size, weight, and food amounts would be greatly reduced compared to their adult counterparts. Indeed, it would make no sense at all to take any animals on board who were not relatively young and therefore smaller, regardless of the species. But if Noah saved the dinosaurs along with all other living things, then why were no dinosaurs ever seen on Earth thereafter? Perhaps there were, and perhaps there continue to be. Deep in the waters of Lake Champlain and the northeastern U.S. border with Canada has been reported a creature which is, like the behemoth and the dinosaurian images in ancient art, the very copy of its dinosaurian counterpart. His more famous cousin, the Loch Ness Monster, has been a legend in Scotland for centuries, long before paleontology existed as a science. Coelacanth, thought to be extinct for 100 million years, was discovered alive off the coast of Madagascar in the late 1930s. Sea turtles and other reptiles and amphibians that exist today are virtually unchanged from their original ancestors when dinosaurs were common on the earth. The Loch Ness Monster, Champ, the Lake Champlain Monster, and endless others. Could these legendary creatures be descendants of animals that roamed the seas more frequently? The Book of Job again.
Canst thou pour out Leviathan with a whip? His teeth are terrible round about. His scales are his line, shut up together, as with a closed sea. No air can come between them. In his neck remaineth mystery.
Like with the tale of the behemoth, the Leviathan's neck also describes a creature which can only be thought of as having dinosaurian origins. This written thousands of years before the science, tools, and techniques of paleontology. Despite skepticism, it is nevertheless a fact that the descriptions of these various legends today all seem to belong to that family of creatures to which plesiosaurs and elasmosaurs belong. Though reported sightings are rare, there continues to be enough evidence of these creatures to inspire study and expeditions the world over using the latest technology to the tune of many millions of dollars a year. In Africa, there is mounting evidence of a creature strongly resembling the great sauropods. This creature, known to the local African population as Mekele Mamembe, has been spotted time and again in the jungle and swamp regions of Nigeria and the Congo. Like so many other reports which were begun long before the techniques of paleontological science, these reports go back centuries and too have become legendary among the people. In this area of the world, where sightings are seemingly common and vast areas still remote and unexplored, may lie one of man's best chances of finding a remaining specimen of one of these fantastic creatures. Over the centuries, there have also been many legends and reportings of flying dragons. The descriptions of these creatures almost always have these common aspects: leathery wings and a reptilian appearance. Of all the creatures that have flown through the skies of our planet, only the flying dinosaurs, supposedly extinct for millions of years, fit that description. Even today there continue to be reportings in remote regions, and while these latter reports are easily questioned, the fact remains that going back thousands of years, some kind of animal was inspiring legends the world over of flying serpents. Legends which seem to embody the very essence of the flying dinosaurs. Current evolutionary theory proposes that the dinosaurs evolved into birds, so similar are their physical structures. However, once again there is not a shred of fossil evidence which demonstrates that dinosaurs evolved into birds. Some creationists resist the thought that dinosaurs were warm-blooded because they seem to think that in admitting such a thing, one admits also that birds descended from dinosaurs. The only thing anyone knows for certain is that a few dinosaurs bore an uncanny resemblance to birds, just as apes resemble human beings, and Darwin enthusiasts have yet to present evidence for that evolutionary connection as well. Legendary sightings, biblical descriptions before fossil reconstruction methods, the statistical likelihood of a meteor-caused global flood, and the art of antiquity displaying clear images of dinosaurs. They all seem to point to dinosaurs having existed within only the last several thousand years. Science is still waiting for the evidence needed to support those theories that the dinosaur existed millions of years before man. That makes scientific theory based on assumption and hope as much of a religion as any other belief, with the possible exception that no scientific text ever written can confirm descriptions of these magnificent creatures earlier than 150 years ago. The only book that can make that claim is the Bible. Were these awesome and magnificent creatures only a dim memory in a long-forgotten epoch of a secular Earth's past? Or is the world made by God much younger than current secular science is guessing? Have they been extinguished forever by random circumstance and the countless eons? Or are the remnants of these exotic creatures still living in remote, uninhabited regions? Only time will tell, but it may be that we are still a long time off before seeing the last of the Leviathan.